First contact, worst contact. The warning klaxons aboard the Centauri mining colony pierced through First Officer Zextil's crystalline sensory membranes, causing them to ripple with distress. The spindly alien turned all four eyes toward Station Commander Riala, who stood motionless before the primary viewport, her iridescent scales reflecting the emergency lighting. "Commander, the Ravager Fleet has breached the outer defense grid," Zextil reported, their translator struggling to maintain composure. "Standard protocols have failed. Should we begin evacuation procedures?" Commander Riala's tail twitched, a sign of deep contemplation among the Serpentari. "No," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of command. "We're going to try something different. Open a channel to Earth Defense Command." Zextil's crystalline structure nearly shattered from shock. "The humans? Commander, with all due respect, they're barbarians. Their planet has active volcanoes, they drink poison for pleasure, and they intentionally jump out of perfectly functional aircraft." "Exactly," Riala hissed, a sound that might have been amusement. "Who better to help us fight monsters than the species that turned their death world into a playground?" The communication array hummed to life, its holographic display flickering with static before stabilizing. The face that appeared belonged to Commander Jaina Webb of the Earth Defense Force, her dark skin contrasting sharply with the stark white of her uniform. She looked surprisingly casual for someone about to receive news of an impending catastrophe. "Centauri mining colony, this is Commander Webb. You're looking a bit stressed out there. Bad day?" Riala's scales shifted to a deeper blue. "Commander Webb, we have a Ravager fleet bearing down on our position. Our conventional defenses are failing, and we have over 3,000 civilians in this colony." "Ravagers, huh?" Webb's expression shifted from casual to calculating, but her smile remained. "Those biological warships that everyone's so scared of? The ones that adapt to standard combat protocols?" "The very same," Riala confirmed. "We've heard rumors that humans have had unusual success against them." Webb's smile widened. "Oh, you have no idea. How do you feel about jazz?" Before Riala could process that non sequitur, Webb was already typing commands into her console. "I've got 3 ships in your sector. The improvisation, the chaos theory, and my personal favorite, the hold my beer. We'll be there in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Zextil interrupted. "The nearest human outpost is 3 systems away." "Who says we're coming from an outpost?" Webb winked. "Let's just say we've been conducting some experimental maneuvers in the area. Fair warning though, our tactics might seem a bit unconventional." At this point, Riala said, watching as another defense satellite succumbed to Ravager fire, "Unconventional is exactly what we need." "Perfect." Webb's enthusiasm was almost frightening. "Quick question, how do your people feel about roller coasters?" The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the colony's remaining defenders prepared for whatever madness the humans had planned. Riala found herself both dreading and anticipating what was to come. The Ravager ships drew closer, their biomechanical forms pulsing with sickly green energy. And then space itself seemed to hiccup. 3 human vessels literally tumbled into reality, spinning and weaving in patterns that made Zextil's navigation systems crash from trying to calculate their trajectories. They moved less like warships and more like dancers in a chaotic ballet. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations," Webb's voice rang through all channels, including, surprisingly, the Ravager's own communication frequencies, "welcome to what we like to call Operation Pandemonium. Please keep your appendages inside the ride at all times, and remember, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right." The battle that followed would redefine everything the galaxy thought it knew about space combat. But for now, as Riala watched the human ships begin what appeared to be an elaborate game of cat's cradle with their own energy trails, she had only one thought. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had survived their death world, they had learned to turn chaos itself into an art form. Unconventional tactics. Commander Webb's voice crackled through the command channel with the same casual tone one might use to discuss lunch plans. "Alright team, let's show our new friends how we dance back on Earth. Improvisation, you're up first, time to demonstrate that special maneuver we've been practicing." The improvisation, a ship that seemed to defy conventional design logic, suddenly began rotating on multiple axes while maintaining its forward momentum. To the horror of every trained military observer on the Centauri mining colony, it appeared to be juggling its own plasma torpedoes. "Is that ship playing with its weapons?" Zextil's crystalline form flickered with disbelief. "Lieutenant Kira," Webb's voice carried a note of pride, "holds the sole system record for competitive zero-G juggling. Turns out those skills have some interesting military applications." The Ravager ships, their biological components struggling to predict this completely irrational behavior, began to show signs of confusion. Their typically coordinated attacks became erratic as their tactical computers attempted to calculate trajectories for objects that were deliberately violating the laws of physics. Meanwhile, the chaos theory lived up to its name by executing what appeared to be a series of loop-de-loops while trailing quantum filaments behind it. The filaments created a complex web that seemed to serve no purpose until several Ravager ships tried to pass through it, and found their biomechanical systems suddenly playing what sounded suspiciously like Earth disco music. Fun fact about Ravager ships, Webb explained to the increasingly bewildered colony leadership. Their biological components are surprisingly susceptible to rhythm. Who knew, right? Lieutenant Park on the Chaos Theory used to be a DJ before joining the Defense Force. Those quantum filaments? They're basically space speakers. The third ship, the Hold My Beer, was perhaps the most terrifying of all. It appeared to be deliberately flying backward while spinning, its weapon systems firing in patterns that created what looked like elaborate connect-the-dots pictures in space. "Commander," Riala managed to ask, "are your ships drawing pictures with their weapon systems?" "Oh, that's Lieutenant Rodriguez. She majored in art before joining up. Says combat is just another medium for creative expression. Look, I think that last barrage was supposed to be a smiley face." The Ravager Fleet, faced with an enemy that refused to follow any known tactical doctrine, began to show signs of genuine distress. Their biological components, evolved to predict and counter rational combat strategies, were receiving input that their processing centers simply couldn't parse. "Here's the thing about Ravagers," Webb continued, as the Hold My Beer executed what could only be described as a barrel roll through its own weapon's fire. "They evolved to counter logical, predictable combat strategies. But humans? We threw logic out the window somewhere between inventing hot sauce and deciding that jumping out of planes for fun was a good idea." The battle continued to unfold like a fever dream choreographed by a mad genius. The improvisation's juggled torpedoes created an ever-shifting sphere of explosions that somehow herded the Ravager ships into the Chaos Theory's musical web, while the Hold My Beer's artistic attacks forced them to dodge in ways that only served to amplify the effects of the quantum-generated music. "You see," Webb explained, as if giving a lecture on an especially interesting scientific phenomenon, "conventional military doctrine says you should never be predictable in combat. But we figured, why stop there? Why not be so unpredictable that we loop right back around to a new kind of predictability? One that only makes sense if you've ever tried to teach a cat to swim while riding a unicycle." Zextil's translator gave up entirely on that last statement, but the results were becoming clear. The Ravager ships, their biological components overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the human attack patterns, were starting to break formation. Some were actually retreating, while others seemed to have given up on combat entirely and were swaying in space to the rhythm of the quantum filaments. "I think they're starting to get it," Webb said cheerfully. "Ready for Phase 2? This is where we really start having fun." Riala, watching as one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy was being systematically dismantled by what appeared to be performance art, could only ask, "There's more?" Oh, honey, Webb's grin was audible in her voice, we haven't even broken out the space kazoos yet. Lieutenant Park has this theory about resonant frequencies and dance battles that you're going to love. As the human ships began what Webb casually referred to as the real show, Riala made a mental note to update the colony's tactical databases. Under effective countermeasures against Ravager forces, she would simply write, contact humans. Stand back. Try not to think too hard about what happens next. The galaxy was about to learn an important lesson. Sometimes the best defense against an overwhelming force isn't superior firepower or better tactics, it's the ability to make the enemy question everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality itself. Dance of the Desperate. As the Ravager fleet struggled to comprehend the chaos unfolding before them, Commander Webb initiated what she cheerfully called Operation Stardust. The name, like everything else about human military operations, made very little sense until you saw it in action. You know what's really interesting about biological warfare ships? Webb's voice carried the tone of someone about to share a favorite recipe. They're technically alive. And you know what living things do? They dance. The Hold My Beer suddenly ceased its artistic weapons display and began emitting a complex series of electromagnetic pulses. These pulses, carefully calibrated to match specific frequencies, started to interact with the biological components of the Ravager ships in unexpected ways. Lieutenant Nix spent 3 years studying xenobiology, Webb explained as the pulses took effect. Then they spent another 2 years as a professional choreographer. The overlap between those skills is surprisingly relevant right now. The results were immediate and spectacular. The nearest Ravager vessel, a massive dreadnought-class ship, began to twitch. Its biological components, responding to the rhythmic pulses, started to move in ways their designers had never intended. The ship's weapon ports pulsed in time with the beat, transforming deadly energy blasts into something that looked suspiciously like a light show. Did you just turn their weapons into disco balls? Zek still asked, their crystalline structure vibrating with disbelief. Technically, it's more like bioluminescent rhythmic response, Webb corrected. But yeah, disco ball sounds cooler. Wait till you see what happens when we hit them with the bass drop. The improvisation, still juggling its torpedoes, began weaving them into increasingly complex patterns that somehow complemented the electromagnetic pulses. Each explosion added its own note to the growing symphony of chaos, creating what Webb called a tactical soundtrack. The thing about Ravagers, Lieutenant Kira's voice joined the command channel, is that they expect war to be this serious, grim business. But humans? We turned our most devastating weapons into firework shows. We made our deadliest ships dance. We looked at the cold vacuum of space and thought, you know what this needs? More party. As if to emphasize this point, the chaos theory began executing a series of maneuvers that looked less like combat tactics and more like a zero-gravity ballet. Each movement left trails of quantum filaments that formed intricate patterns in space, creating what Lieutenant Park called a stellar dance floor. The Ravager fleet's response was becoming increasingly erratic. Some ships tried to maintain their tactical formations, only to find themselves inadvertently synchronizing with the human's rhythm. Others attempted to retreat, but the quantum filament web had turned their escape routes into what Webb described as a cosmic conga line. Here's the best part, Webb announced with obvious delight. Their biological components are starting to enjoy it. Those ships aren't just following our lead, they're improvising. Sure enough, several Ravager vessels had begun moving in ways that seemed almost playful. Their typically aggressive attack patterns had transformed into something that looked more like a choreographed performance. The deadly dance of space combat had become, quite literally, a dance. This is impossible, Riala whispered, her scales shifting through colors of amazement. You've turned one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy into dance partners. Webb finished cheerfully. Think about it, their whole strategy relies on being the biggest, scariest thing in space. But how do you maintain that reputation when you're doing the cha-cha with an Earth Defense Force frigate? The battle, if it could still be called that, continued to evolve in increasingly surreal ways. The Hold My Beer's artistic attacks had somehow synchronized with the improvisation's torpedo juggling to create what Lieutenant Rodriguez proudly called kinetic art installations. The chaos theory's quantum web had expanded to encompass the entire engagement zone, turning the battlefield into what looked like a stellar nightclub. Attention Ravager Fleet, Webb broadcast on all frequencies, her voice carrying the same tone one might use to MC a party. Welcome to humanity's first intergalactic rave. No cover charge, but fair warning, we take our dance battles very seriously. The response from the Ravager ships came not in the form of weapons fire or tactical maneuvers, but as a series of bioluminescent pulses that matched the rhythm of the human's electromagnetic dance beat. Their biological components, originally designed for warfare, had found a new purpose in what Webb would later describe in her official report as tactical interpretive dance. See? Webb's satisfaction was palpable. This is why humans always win. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we're really good at turning everything, even mortal combat, into a party. And nobody wants to be the one to ruin a good party. As Riala watched the scene unfold, she realized that the galaxy would need to revise its understanding of both warfare and humanity. The species that had survived a death world hadn't done so through superior strength or advanced technology, but through their unique ability to find joy in chaos and turn their enemies into unwitting participants in their endless celebration of life. The dance of the desperate had become a symphony of survival, and the Ravagers were about to learn that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, it's an invitation to join the party. Symphony of Chaos. The battlefield had transformed into something that defied conventional military description. The Ravager Fleet, once a terrifying force of biological warfare, now moved through space in patterns that would make a professional dance troupe jealous. Commander Webb watched from the Hold My Beer's bridge with the satisfaction of a conductor watching her orchestra reach a perfect crescendo. Lieutenant Nix, Webb called out, how are our biological readings looking? Nix's fingers danced across their console, their silver hair reflecting the kaleidoscope of lights from the ongoing space ballet. The Ravager ship's biological components are showing unprecedented levels of serotonin-equivalent compounds. In simple terms, they're having the time of their lives. The improvisation had evolved its torpedo juggling into what Lieutenant Kira was calling synchronized stellar gymnastics. Each explosive charge detonated in perfectly timed sequences, creating ripples of energy that the Ravager ships were now actively following like steps in a cosmic dance routine. You know what's really interesting? Webb mused, watching as a Ravager dreadnought executed a perfect spiral maneuver through a series of quantum filaments. We spent centuries trying to figure out how to fight these beings effectively. Turns out we just needed to invite them to dance. On the Centauri mining colony, Riala and Zextil continued to monitor the situation with a mixture of awe and confusion. The colony's sensors were picking up something unprecedented. The Ravager ships were beginning to emit their own harmonic frequencies, adding their own notes to the human symphony of chaos. They're composing, Zextil announced, their crystalline form vibrating in harmony with the new frequencies. The Ravagers are actually creating music. Of course they are, Webb's voice carried a note of pride. That's the thing about living beings, give them a beat, and sooner or later, they'll want to make their own music. Lieutenant Park, let's encourage our new friends, shall we? The chaos theory responded by modulating its quantum web, adjusting the frequencies to complement the Ravager's emerging composition. What had started as a tactical maneuver had evolved into something unprecedented, the first-ever human Ravager collaborative space concert. You have to understand, Lieutenant Rodriguez explained from her position aboard the Hold My Beer, humans have this thing about turning everything into art. War? That's just another canvas. Deadly space battles? That's just interpretive dance with explosions. The symphony reached new heights as more Ravager ships joined in, their biological components pulsing with rhythms that synchronized perfectly with the human's quantum harmonics. The battlefield had become a three-dimensional musical score, written in light, energy, and motion. This is either the most brilliant military strategy in history, Riala observed, or the most elaborate party in the galaxy. Why not both? Webb replied cheerfully. Humans have a long tradition of combining the two. You should see what we did with the ancient Greek war dance called the Pyrrhic dance. Turns out it works surprisingly well in zero gravity. The turning point came when a particularly large Ravager vessel, which Webb had nicknamed Big Bertha, began emitting a deep, resonant frequency that perfectly complemented the bass lines generated by the chaos theory's quantum web. The sound, if it could be called that in the vacuum of space, rippled through the electromagnetic spectrum in ways that made stellar cartographers weep. Now that, Webb announced with obvious delight, is what I call a proper space jam. Lieutenant Park, let's show them how we do it Earth style. The chaos theory responded by initiating what Park called Operation Drop the Beat, a carefully calibrated series of quantum pulses that transformed the entire battlefield into what appeared to be a massive orchestral arrangement. Each ship, human and Ravager alike, became an instrument in this incredible performance. The really beautiful thing, Webb commented, watching as a group of Ravager frigates performed what could only be described as a synchronized swimming routine through the quantum web, is that we're not forcing them to do this. Their biological components have figured out that making music is way more fun than making war. The scene continued to evolve in increasingly spectacular ways. The Hold My Beer's artistic attack patterns had become the visual accompaniment to this unprecedented concert, creating what Rodriguez proudly called a multisensory masterpiece. The improvisation's torpedo display now served as a kind of percussive section, adding rhythm and tempo to the growing symphony. I think, Webb said thoughtfully, watching as yet another Ravager ship joined the performance, we've just invented a new form of diplomacy. Who needs formal peace talks when you can have an intergalactic dance-off? As the Symphony of Chaos reached its crescendo, it became clear that something fundamental had changed in the relationship between humans and Ravagers. The beings that had evolved as living weapons had discovered something they never knew they were missing, the joy of creative expression. Commander, Nix reported, their voice carrying a note of amazement, we're picking up something new from the Ravager ships. It looks like they're trying to teach us their own dance moves. Webb's smile could have powered a small star system. Well, folks, I believe this is what we call a cultural exchange. Lieutenant Park, let's show our new friends the electric slide. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the best way to end a war isn't through superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but through the universal language of rhythm, music, and the simple joy of dancing among the stars. Victory's echo. What had begun as a desperate defense of the Centauri mining colony had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. The final phase of the engagement looked less like a battle and more like an interstellar music festival, with Commander Webb serving as master of ceremonies. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations, Webb broadcast across all frequencies, I believe it's time for our grand finale. Lieutenant Park, cue up what we like to call the Universal Symphony. The three human ships moved into position, forming a triangular pattern that Zextil's sensors struggled to properly analyze. The Ravager Fleet, now fully immersed in the rhythm of the moment, arranged themselves in a complementary formation that resembled a cosmic flower blooming in space. You know what's really remarkable? Webb mused as she coordinated the final movements. Not a single shot fired in anger for the past hour. Turns out even living weapons prefer a good beat to a bad fight. The Hold My Beer initiated what Lieutenant Rodriguez called her masterpiece, a complex series of energy patterns that painted the void with swirling colors. The improvisation's carefully choreographed torpedo display provided a framework of light and shadow, while the chaos theory's quantum web tied everything together in a harmonious whole. The really interesting part, Lieutenant Nix reported, monitoring the biological readings from the Ravager ships, is that their neural patterns have fundamentally changed. They're not just dancing, they're evolving. Their biological weapon systems are reconfiguring themselves into something more like musical instruments. Riala watched from the colony as the massive Ravager dreadnought, Big Bertha, led its fleet in what could only be described as a space ballet. They're not just following your lead anymore, she observed. They're creating something new. Exactly. Webb's enthusiasm was infectious. That's what humans do best, we don't just change the game, we inspire others to play their own version of it. Lieutenant Park, let's give them something to really dance about. The final movement of this unprecedented performance began with a synchronization of all three human ship systems. The chaos theory's quantum harmonics merged with the improvisation's light show and the Hold My Beer's artistic patterns to create what Webb would later describe in her report as a multidimensional expression of joy through controlled chaos. The Ravager fleet responded in kind, their biological components pulsing with colors never before seen in their species. Each ship contributed its own unique frequency to the growing symphony, creating harmonies that defied conventional physics and delighted human sensors. You see, Webb explained to the astonished colony leaders, humans have always known something that most species take centuries to figure out: the best way to survive isn't just to adapt, it's to celebrate the adaptation. Turn every challenge into a party, every battle into a dance, every enemy into a potential dance partner. As the performance reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. The Ravager ships, led by Big Bertha, began transmitting a new type of signal, not a weapon signature or tactical data, but what appeared to be an invitation. They want to teach us their dances, Nix announced, their voice filled with wonder. They're offering to show us how their biological systems create harmony. In return, they want to learn more about human music and dance. Webb's laughter filled the command channel. And just like that, folks, we've turned the galaxy's most feared warriors into art enthusiasts. I don't think this is quite what the Defense Force had in mind when they told us to find innovative solutions, but I'm calling it a win. The celebration continued for hours, with human and Ravager ships performing increasingly complex maneuvers together. The Centauri mining colony, once under threat of destruction, had become the venue for the first-ever human Ravager cultural exchange program. You know what the best part is? Webb remarked as she watched a group of Ravager frigates attempt their first conga line. We're going to have to completely rewrite the manual on first contact protocols. Chapter 1, Always bring a good playlist. In the end, when the energy signatures finally began to fade and the quantum harmonics settled into a gentle hum, something profound had changed in this corner of the galaxy. The Ravagers, who had evolved as living weapons, had discovered a new purpose. The humans, who had turned survival into an art form, had gained new partners in their eternal dance through the cosmos. Riala, watching as the last echoes of the performance faded into space, made her final log entry of the day, witnessed the impossible, a species that turned the most feared force in the galaxy into a dance troupe. Note to self, when facing extinction-level threats, call humans. They may not solve the problem in any way you expect, but they'll definitely make it memorable. As the human ships prepared to depart, leaving behind a thoroughly transformed Ravager fleet and a very bewildered but grateful colony, Commander Webb had one final transmission. Remember, folks, in space, everyone can watch you dance. Might as well make it a good show.